it's really deeply important to make sure people have access to the basic resources so that they can really envision the future that they want for themselves and their families.
Welcome to Real Leadership, the show that cuts through the clutter to spotlight leaders who make, move, and process things in the real economy. This isn't about buzzwords or theories. It's about bold decisions, solving challenges, and the strategies driving industries that matter. I'm Jim Weaver, CEO of the Owner Group. In every episode, we get real about what it takes to turn vision into action and obstacles into opportunities. Let's go. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Tiffany Benjamin, CEO of Humana Foundation, the philanthropic arm of one of the largest healthcare companies in the country. Tiffany represents a departure from our typical guest profile as she leads a philanthropic organization rather than a traditional real economy business. But I wanted to talk to her because her work directly impacts many of the people who work in the industrial economy. She's a Harvard-trained lawyer who started out with a major firm, then spent several years on Capitol Hill as a senior investigative counsel for Congress. From there, she joined Eli Lilly, rising through its legal ranks before stepping in to lead the company's foundation and its social impact work. By the time she moved to philanthropy full-time, she had already spent years working at the intersection of law, policy, and large institutions. Since taking over the Humana Foundation in 2022, she's sharpened its focus around a few clear priorities: mental and behavioral health, food security, and closing the gaps in health outcome, while also building out its disaster response work and co-founding a national initiative aimed at reducing veteran suicide. Along the way, she's been recognized for her leadership in the field, including a spot on the integral TIME100 Philanthropy list of most influential philanthropists, and she leads the way in a way you don't also see. She's very candid about what hasn't worked and is convinced that the best solutions also come from listening rather than dictating. Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I struggle with the word philanthropy, and it was in there a lot. So I appreciate that. I think I got through the intro. That was like the big hurdle for my day. All right, Tiffany, you have a really impressive resume, JD from Harvard, and this a great career. But as I was researching you, the thing that really I found very compelling and kind of it's the thing that got me most excited about talking to you is your origin story. So tell us about your mother's work as a social worker in the 80s and your observation of that, and it kind of brings us up to speed on that. I think that seems like that was pretty pivotal for you.
Yeah, it was. So I always like to harken back to my childhood. I think most of us do. Back in the day, my mom was a telephone operator when that was a thing. Like, she was a switchboard operator at Purdue University. And then she decided she wanted to go back to school to be a social worker, and she was a single mom. So she took me with her whenever she was, going through her clinics and learning. And so I learned really early on the value of sitting with people in community, and how sometimes just listening to people is what matters. So she was and is a very brave person. And this is a time when we didn't know a lot about the HIV/AIDS epidemic, but she volunteered and served to support people who were suffering from HIV/AIDS. And she took me with her. And I saw really the power of her work of just saying, you matter, tell me what you're going through, showing true empathy for people. And so I like to think that every day I show up and I try to hold down empathy the same way she did.
How old were you? I'm not trying to tip the cards on your age, but just curious. Range. You
I was
young,
very
right?
young. I was in elementary school. So this is, like very young, first, second grade. And so I can't think of a time where I didn't understand that the best thing you can do for people is listen to them and see them and truly, truly see them.
Okay. So that's your mom, powerhouse, working deep in the gritty, human, like in there, and then your dad also, I've heard you speak very movingly about your father. Tell us about his care. He had a stroke. His care that you witnessed when he had a stroke, and how that sort of has influenced you and shaped you as well.
He had a series of strokes, unfortunately, and I'm the oldest. I have one half sister, and so I was left to make some really hard decisions about his health, and we didn't have a lot growing up. It was my mom, and then sometimes spent time with my dad, and neither of them had a lot. And towards the end of his life, he had to go into hospice care, and the people who surrounded him in hospice care had such deep empathy, such deep care and kindness. We weren't billionaires, and we were just sort of normal people going through this really hard thing. And it stayed with me how deeply you can really connect to people and impact them by just being there in their moment, sitting with them, using kindness and caution and just caring. I think it sounds cheesy, but if we think back to the moments in our lives, those are the ones we remember. It's the ones where people connect with you. And those are the strongest leadership lessons I've ever learned, are really about how important it is to value people as people, to really understand what matters to them and what drives them. And I carry that because of moments like that with my mom, and seeing the people in the hospice really care for my father in ways that I felt deeply supported.
Yeah, hospice workers are just saints. I swear there's a special place in heaven for them. I mean, 100%. Oh my goodness. Yeah, just remarkable. And the ability to kind of bounce back and just go on to the next case after someone passes away. It's just remarkable work.
I never lose sight of how many people who are just doing good work day in, day out, just because they care about other people, doing good, hard work. And I think you're right, like hospice workers, social workers, like there are just folks day in, day out showing up every day for people they aren't even related to, and just investing in them and pouring into them. And I admire it deeply, and I try to carry it through. And what I do day in, day out, right, is like to try to pour into people.
Recruiting top talent is tough. Onan Staffing focuses on people, offering exceptional benefits to attract and retain dedicated workers. Partner with us for flexible, data-driven solutions. Visit onanstaffing.com to learn more.
Okay, so we'll fast forward a little bit and kind of lay the groundwork for that empathy piece. During law school, you interned with the Equal Justice Initiative and did some interesting work there. It's a story of you digging into a particular case with Brian Stevenson, and ended up resulting in someone who was in prison getting released. Tell us about that and kind of what your takeaways were in life from that experience.
Yeah. So Jim, I was down in Alabama where you are.
Yeah.
And I spent a summer in Montgomery. And a lot of the work they did there was death penalty defense, but also we would get letters from prisoners across really the country, but they're in Alabama, telling us stories about things that they might need help with. And so I went out and I met this woman at a prison there who told me a story about a 3 strikes case. And so I sat with her and I listened, and she told me the story, and she told me all of these things that might have happened in court that just didn't fit. Like they didn't seem right. And I was just a baby lawyer, but I knew they were not things that were allowed under the law. And so I left and I went to the basement of a courthouse and I Xeroxed parts of trial transcripts. I'm dating myself, right? Like people use digital records now, but I was Xeroxing. And I took what I found to the lawyers there because, I was an intern. And I said, I think there's something here. I think what happened to this woman is not right. And we filed something with the courts there. And I went home optimistic, but also I didn't know it was going to happen. And I got a call a couple of years later, and the woman's conviction was overturned and she was released. And ultimately she's living her life these days.
Wow.
I'm very clear it was the most powerful and important thing I think I ever did as a lawyer, and I was a baby lawyer.
Yeah.
And the reason was because all I did was listen. Like, I sat with her and I listened to what she was saying, and I took it seriously. And so then I went and checked, and the records that they had showed that what she said was true. And I think it changed the trajectory of her life and my life, right? Like, I really deeply understood how if you take people seriously, if you meet them where they're at, no matter where they're at, you can drive real impact for them and for really the greater good. And I feel so blessed to have had that experience. And I feel really grateful for having like repeated experiences at a young age of understanding the value of human connection and the value of believing in people.
Okay, so after that, then you started in corporate law.
Yeah.
You moved to the U.S. House of Representatives as a senior counsel, and eventually went to Eli Lilly, where you transitioned from like litigation to leading their social impact work. And then, so that's sort of the path there. What ultimately drove you to pivot from practicing law to dedicating your career to philanthropy?
Yeah, I think you can hear that I had a family that just sort of poured care for other people into me. And so no matter where I was at in my career, I was always doing community work. You know, I took on pro bono cases when I was at the law firm. Obviously, I went to the Hill. I headed our pro bono committee for a while when I was at Eli Lilly and Company. And so I was always doing public-private work. And I was perfectly happy as a lawyer. I really was. I loved being a lawyer. I had a lot of fun. And I felt like I was doing things that were really important to support people I really cared about. As it happens in the world, Jim, I got this job and they said, okay, so here's your job, but here are the 35 other things that we didn't tell you are part of your job. We've all been there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of those things was to be the corporate secretary for the Lilly Corporate Foundation. And I just really cared about that work. I got really interested in it, never thinking it would be a career. I thought, here's a great intersection between like community and the corporate work I'm doing. And are there ways I can help? So I did it for a couple of years. And then one day I got a call from the head of the foundation, and he said, Tiffany, I'm just calling as corporate secretary to let you know I am leaving. And I never thought he would leave. And I was floored, and I don't even know where it came from. I just said, that's so sad, Rob. I'd like your job. And so it made sense, right? Because it was really an intersection between things that I like. What I love about business is it's fast, it's accountable, it's dynamic, and it measures and demands results. Mm-hmm. And what I love about community work and philanthropy is that it's about people and community and making sure you are creating solutions that make sure people are impacted and feel impacted. And so I don't think there's anything better in the world than corporate philanthropy, which takes like the expectations of business and ties it to the needs of community.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. All right. So when you became CEO of the Humana Foundation in 2022, you implemented some pretty major shifts, like walking away from comfortable long-term grantees and sort of focusing narrowly on mental health and nutrition. Why was it necessary to make that shift to go deeper in a small number of areas as opposed to keeping the kind of broader initiative in place?
Yeah, I think a lot of people talk about impact and they talk about change. But if you want to have impact, you have to measure it and you have to hold yourself and everyone else accountable to it. And so if you're trying to boil the ocean, do everything, it's impossible to measure the success of like 85 million totally different things. It's impossible to hold yourself accountable to say, like, did I do what I was going to do? And it feels impossible to drive change. And so in the beginning, I had to make some really hard choices, right? I had to say, like, I know that we've invested in this, but this isn't something that I can measure. And I know that we've had this relationship that's operated this certain way, but we want to drive for people to have more positive health outcomes. And this does not allow me to drive that way, or at least to measure that way. Doesn't mean the work people are doing isn't important.
Sure.
It's important and it's valuable, but it's about like the ability to run your philanthropy like business. And that's what I care about is, can I year over year show results? Can I show long-term results? Can I hold myself accountable? Can I hold grantees accountable? And you only do that by picking very specific focus areas, by picking very specific places you're going to work and being really clear about who you are and who you aren't.
I think the more successful you get, the more the larger the scope of your influence, the better you have to get at saying no.
Well, and the interesting thing about my job is people are like, oh, it's great. You donate and help community organizations. I say no so much more than I say yes. And I say no to really great projects, right? Like people doing wonderful work. But it doesn't fit my priorities. And I have a strategic focus and a priority that I'm trying to execute on. And so it doesn't mean the work isn't good. It doesn't mean that the organization isn't important. It just means I've picked a bucket of things that I'm going to measure our success on, and certain things fit in that bucket and certain don't. But I say no a lot to really good people doing really good work, and it's quite difficult. But I think that saying no that way is showing respect to the organizations, and it's holding me accountable for the work I said I'm going to do.
And you have to put your energy into things that your organization is the best at and that you are the best at.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay. So your foundation has sort of a 2x3 grid. That's kind of my understanding.
I think that's about right.
Yeah. Okay. So you're targeting food scarcity, mental health. That's the 2. And then the specific populations are seniors, school-age children, and veterans. So how did you distill down to that matrix there?
Yeah. So I started with sort of understanding where are the places where Humana and Humana Foundation makes sense to show up. Like there are certain places that if you hear Humana, you would say, why are they doing that work? They don't know anything about those populations. It doesn't make any sense. Given what our company does with Medicare and Medicaid, it made a lot of sense to start our work with seniors, right? Like we have a brand there, we have expertise and knowledge, and it makes sense for us to think about seniors. We also have some work that Humana does around veterans. And so it made sense. People are going to say, oh, you understand the military in these certain ways. And then I was working on topics like mental health and nutrition and food insecurity. And frankly, it just felt weird to me to say, we're going to start focusing on those topics when you turn 65. And so if you really want to change, right, you got to drive it at all moments in time. And so we were like, let's add school-aged kids here. So we're having a well-rounded conversation, but we're having it in places that make sense for us, right? So our work is national, but mostly we focus in Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and Kentucky. And that's because we have a footprint there. It's because we have good partners on the ground. It's because those are places we know. And it's because those are places where people say, oh, we understand why you're here. Like you're invested in this place. And I'm not about going to places where I don't have proximity and telling people what to do. I'm about going into communities and listening to what their needs are and trying to fit what we do to their needs. And you have to have some sort of relationship with the place to be able to do that, right?
Right.
There's a lot of intention around picking the buckets and being narrow. And then frankly, just being transparent about the fact that this is what we do and this is where we do it and this is where we don't do it, right?
I should have asked you this earlier, but okay. So how does the Humana Foundation fit into the very big Humana organization? How do you guys fit? What's your charge? I should have asked that earlier, but go ahead. We'll roll it back.
We are the philanthropic arm of Humana. We're a separate private foundation, but we work super closely with the company. My chairman of my board is actually the son of the founder of the company. He's no longer with the company. He was on our board, the corporate board, for quite a while. And then he came to be my chairman. I have the current CEO on the board and our former CEO and a couple of executives from the company.
The Humana CEO.
Humana CEO sits on my board.
Wow,
and
awesome.
the former CEO of Humana sits on my board.
Cool.
Some executives. And then we actually have a dean of a public health school in Houston who sits on our board to give us advice on how to think about these topics from an academic and population health perspective. So it's a mix of people who are connected to Humana, sit in Humana, and people who are just experts in the spaces that we're working, which we love because we get expertise from the company, but we also get expertise from people who are out in the field in many different ways.
So one could look at that and think, you know what? you could take the skeptical view of it and say, you know what, Humana does not have an incentive for people to be well, right? Like from a business standpoint, you could say, right? So why is Humana doing this? It'd be easy to look like kind of skeptically and say, oh, they're just window dressing. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I think we have a huge incentive for people to be well, right? We are a consumer healthcare company, which means that we want to reduce the cost of healthcare on the system across the board. That's important for us. It's important for our shareholders. It's important for our patients and the people who use our services. And so across the board, we care really deeply about whether we can do things to make people healthier, because it reduces the cost on the healthcare system, and we're part of that ecosystem, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's something that matters. And so one of the really nice things about the work that I do is I think holistically about health, not healthcare. Right. But I think about health and how we make people healthier. And then that company thinks about healthcare and how we can make sure people are healthier on the healthcare side. And so the two things work together beautifully as an opportunity to think about, like, what are the solutions we're wrapping around people? We don't want people to be sicker. We want them to be healthier. We want them to not end up in the hospital and other things. And the ways you address that are certainly healthcare driven, but they're also about the social determinants of health, right? We call them the social drivers of health because they're preventable. Yeah. They're about access to healthy food. They're about, is your mental well-being strong enough so that you can take care of yourself, so you can get up and take your medicine or get out and get healthy. And so all those things matter in making people healthier and, frankly, in reducing the stress on the healthcare ecosystem.
I love the way you explained the strength of corporate philanthropy and results orientation. So what are the results? What are the KPIs that you are held to? What are you that you hold yourself to?
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate asking that question. I think everybody should ask everybody in philanthropy how we hold ourselves accountable for what our work is. Yeah. And for us, we actually have a chief impact officer because we took this work so seriously. We wanted someone whose job it is just focus on impact. So what we do is we track our individual investments, so our grants to nonprofits, and we track the basics of, are they doing what they said they would do, right? Like that matters to us. But then what we also do is we have standardized metrics that we ask our grantees to use. So for example, we do a lot of work around senior loneliness and senior social isolation. And we ask our grantees to use the UCLA Loneliness Index as a tool when they're measuring the people who go through their programs. So we can track, are you showing through a quantitative metric, sometimes qualitative, but something that is standardized, that you have impacted people? And what that does is that allows us to track individual grantees, but it allows us to look across our portfolio and say, are we moving the needle on metrics like the UCLA Loneliness Index across the board? And if we aren't, we have to adjust what we're funding. We have to shift and ebb and move around partners. The other thing we do is most of our grants are 3 to 5 year grants. And the reason is because if we're going to get to health outcomes, you have to invest a little bit longer, right? Yeah. So if you're asking people to do year over year, it's not enough time to collect the data you need to see if you've improved health outcomes. So we pick that time frame because it allows us to really look at, has there been improvement over a period of time, right? But you don't want the time to be too long. Again, we run our philanthropy like business. And so there are plenty of foundations that are doing great 20-year work, but we're trying to figure out, like, are you moving the needle? Are there indicators that suggest that people are healthier in the ways we're focused on? And then once we see those indicators, what's next, right? What's next for us, right? And for grantees too.
Yeah, it makes sense that it would be the outcomes would be tailored based on, okay, what are we getting behind here? It's got to be every grant needs to have that. Okay. So the term health equity, you're results-based person, right? Like health equity sounds a little abstract. So in practical terms, what does health equity look like when it's functioning correctly in a community? Like, what do you envision?
What we talk about is the fact that our work is focused on subpopulations. And so we try to look at the data of where there might be populations that are sicker or struggling more, and if we can make impacts on these most impacted populations. So an example might be rural health. That's a bucket where we know access to mental health services is more limited for people in a rural community, right? Like it's just sort of a natural thing there. And so we're trying to focus on these subpopulations there and say, what are the interventions that can work really effectively for them, right? So, for example, we've given funding to Older Adults Technology Services to expand some work they're doing around rural healthcare access, because we know there are challenges for everybody in the system, but there are these subpopulations where it's just exacerbated because of where they live or who they are. We do the same with our veterans work. If you look at the data, for example, we've focused on suicide prevention for veterans. They have a suicide rate that's higher than 60% higher than the civilian population.
Wow.
It's a shocking number. And so if you see a population where the numbers are a little bit higher, that's the place we're going. Like we're not doing general everybody. We're going to places where it's harder and picking those hard spots and trying to chip away at those spaces.
Okay, that makes sense. So food scarcity or food security is a focus for you. So we got behind the Carver Jones Market in Fairfield, Alabama here. And it's an area that's considered a food desert. And we absolutely see, we bought into the vision of, giving access and, how could it was impossible, for folks to make healthy choices food wise, or very difficult in that community. It was a beautiful store right where it needed to be. It was priced right, but there just wasn't enough business to keep the place going. And the initial funding dried up. It was in the red and the demand wasn't there. When I think about it, we don't have there's plenty of food, but in my view, the problem is it's highly processed and we have an obesity issue because it's bereft of nutrients, the food that folks are eating, and the goal is to drive decisions around eating better food and giving access to better food. So, but it's one thing to make it accessible. It's another thing to get people to eat it. You know what I mean? And the processed stuff is highly addictive, really. So how do you think about that? How do we address that challenge?
Yeah, it's a great question. We talk about our work as like the intersection between nutrition and chronic conditions. So I'm so glad you touched on obesity. You think about diabetes, heart disease, all these other things. Almost all of our food work has this nutrition education component to it, because like the story you told, like I always think about those stories where people say like somebody went to a farmer's market, they got squash. They've never had squash before in their life. They take it home. Nobody has any idea what to do with squash. Like if you asked me to make squash, I would use the Googles and I would make it work, but it's a challenge. And so I think it's really important when you're doing food security work, and if you're really serious about the nutrition component, that you're adding in elements that allow people to actually learn, admit vulnerability about not knowing what's happening, and then use it in their actual home. So for example, we funded some work with the Humana Foundation, which is around kids in certain schools learning how to cook healthy food and nutrition education. So they get the food, but also there's an access point of a school, and then they can take it home and with their parents use the recipes, learn it together. So you've taken away like the physical access part, but you've also made it accessible in something that like fits with a family, right? Like at an intersection that makes sense to them.
Yeah.
I think that's really important when you're doing the nutrition work, is that you're meeting people where they're at. You're coming up with recipes that don't feel weird for a family, right?
Yeah.
Like if people like spaghetti, you teach them about zucchini noodles and you keep moving, right? Like you don't just go, you don't eat pasta anymore. That's not what you do, right?
Right. Yeah. You're probably too educated to watch this show. You ever watch The Office?
Of course I watch The Office.
Okay. You remember the one where they're trying to lose weight and Kevin, they try to get him to eat broccoli and they're stuffing this piece of broccoli, this big stalk in his mouth, and he can't. That's what I think of when trying to, like we're talking about eating whole foods. And if you've spent your whole life not eating that, it is a tough pivot. So I think working when folks are young and kind of seeding that, then I think that you're spot on. I think that's the key.
Yeah. And making it intergenerational too. So for the folks who aren't young, making it something that was really important to us with some of the work is making it so like it's a thing the family does together, right? So like we get the kid young, but we also try to embed those habits into a family, right?
Yeah.
Feels like something that translates to everybody in the household.
Okay. So as you manage an endowment of, 400 million and change, and you distribute 28, 30 million a year, what's the biggest operational or strategic challenge you face today, ensuring those dollars actually move the needle?
Yeah, I think it's going to be two sides of the same coin. I think that first thing is there is so much need, right? Like in the spaces we're working in, you're just talking about a story about like the need, but matching the need to what my dollars are for and where it's at and where the demand is, because there are a lot of great nonprofits doing great things, but you got to figure out where's the place where people are actually going to come to take those services, right? Like a great idea is great, but you got to make sure people are actually going to use it. So some of it is us figuring out, okay, is this something the community cares about, the community wants, or is it something that I, Tiffany, think is a great idea, which I don't live in most of the communities I serve, so I cannot speak on their behalf for what's important. So some of that is just figuring out, if we pick something, is this something that people in that community think is a good choice for them, that feels like they will be impacted and it will actually impact them? So that's one of the hard choices. The other thing is we do an open application process, which means we get applications from all over the place. And we have to decipher from what starts as a written process, how that's experienced to people on the ground, right? Like it's really challenging to take that process that's sort of formalized and figure out how it feels to people. Like, does it work, right? And then you got to do that in a resource constrained environment for you and the nonprofits. And so figuring out how what's on paper translates to actual people is one of the most important parts of this work.
You talk about the importance of transparency in failure in the philanthropic space. Articulate why that's important, and why do you think most folks don't go there?
Oh, Jim, you want me on a soapbox. I think it is just true that oftentimes in philanthropy, we only want to be celebrated for our wins, to say like, oh, we did great things. And we do great things. Like there are amazing things that have come from philanthropy, but no one ever learns if they don't ever fail. And one of the great things about philanthropy is it funds people to test and try innovative solutions to things. But if you don't have the risk appetite to test and try, then you can't test and try. And if you can't acknowledge that some things just aren't going to work and they're going to fail, then you don't have the willingness to take risk, to try innovative things, to invest in organizations that may or may not work. And so I think it's really important for us to name, just like business does, that sometimes you take big bets and they work, and sometimes you take big bets and they don't work, and then you learn from them and you keep moving, right?
Yeah.
That's a thing I love about business, is that business is filled with people who take smart risk, but they know it's risk. And so they know that it is risk, and so they do it. And if it works, amazing. And if it doesn't work, you learned something and you don't do it that way again.
Yeah.
So I think philanthropy could really benefit from really thinking about the work that way, so that we're investing in solutions that are innovative, so that we are doing things that are new, so that we are taking some risk. Because if you want to solve big problems, you can't do it without taking some risk.
Yeah, there's winning and learning. And if we aren't honest about what doesn't work, there is no learning. So, yeah.
I said it before, I don't sit in the communities I serve. I try to be as proximate as I can. I try to show up constantly, but I don't know everything. Like I didn't never have claimed to know everything. And so like, I have to be able to acknowledge when I didn't get that right, or I didn't know it. Like, that is also leadership, is saying, you know what, I just didn't get that one right. Let's keep going.
Yeah. So we've had this theme of the power of proximity that we've come back to. I was thinking about this just before the interview. So the practice of our federal government giving money to NGOs to address specific needs, it's come under a lot of scrutiny recently. And on one hand, I understand, like, the model makes sense theoretically. Like, those NGOs are more connected to the issues they address. It makes sense in a lot of ways for the federal government to tackle issues that way. But there's also a lot of opportunity for mistaking activity for accomplishment, not really measuring outcomes. And there's also opportunity for fraud, right? So what's your critique of that model and how it's working currently? And how do we as Americans need to think about approaching that, going forward with tax dollars?
First of all, I think most nonprofits are out here doing really good work. I think there are people just like you who are volunteering at a food bank trying to do the right thing for their givers. Yeah. And I spend a lot of time out in community. And what I see day in, day out that I think sometimes gets lost is how many people are so focused on helping other people. There are so many people who are helping their neighbors, their churches, volunteering. And we don't talk about that discourse enough from my perspective. There is something inherent about us as Americans that we want to help other people. Like, it's built into our fiber, and you just see it in the ways that we socialize and in the existence of GoFundMe and all of these other things.
Sure. Yeah.
And so the model matters less to me than, are we doing things to help people in community? But what I really like about philanthropy is that it allows people to pool dollars to get at big solutions, to get at like really thorny things. And what I do know is that there are nonprofits out there day in, day out serving people in really thoughtful ways. And I know how hard it is to really understand what's actually happening on the ground. So somebody told me this story once that I really, really stuck with me. I hope I can tell it and do justice. That someone was working on this program for women who were seeking maternity care, and they were offering like shuttles for women to come. They were trying to get women to come to this maternity care center. And they built this program from afar, and they couldn't figure out why women weren't using the program. And so they built 85 other solutions. Like, we'll have shuttles, we'll do all these other things. And they still couldn't figure out why women weren't using the program. And then eventually, after like 85 different tests, that's an exaggeration, but after testing several solutions, they actually went and talked to the women. And the women said, actually, our neighborhood has this problem with like rabid dogs, just very random problem. And like, it means that we're not going to stand outside and wait for your services, especially while we're pregnant. We're just trying to stay safe. Yes. And so if people had started by talking to the people on the ground and asking them, like, what is the service you need and what are the obstacles to it? They would have seen the solution. But somebody from afar was trying to build it operating off of just themes of what they perceived versus understanding the on the ground thing. And what NGOs and nonprofits do is they sit on the ground. So when somebody's using a service or not, they can go to their door and ask them, what's the real obstacle, right?
Yeah.
So that's really important, because there are things that just don't show up on paper or in reports or studies about the way that humans are interacting with their neighborhoods that are really unique to exactly where they sit.
There's almost nothing more tragic in my view than squandered human potential. And so we're in a business, or we place 80,000-ish blue collar teammates every single year. And we get to see firsthand how, like, this social determinants of health you talk about, food access, mental health struggles, transportation issues, childcare, all that stuff, it drives our workforce participation rate down. I mean, the Alabama workforce participation rate, I think, is the lowest, or one of the lowest. It's in the low 60s%.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's not, I mean, like, I think the average in the US is just over 70, but I mean, that's really, that is wasted human potential, in a lot of cases, I think. And so how do you view the connection between the work you're doing and how that connects with the strength of the workforce and the strength of our economy.
I think about it this way. Like, let's take our mental health work. Like, if you are depressed, you are likely to opt out of the workforce in one way or another, right? Like, there are a lot of ways that you're not showing up in your community, not taking care of your family. If you are isolated, you are likely to be sicker. Like, the data shows that, for example, socially isolated seniors are sicker, have a higher risk of dementia, these kinds of things. And these are things that opt people out of the workforce, right? And so if you don't address these social determinants of health, making sure people have food, making sure they have access to adequate mental health care, you are putting roadblocks in place that make it much harder to get up and go to work. I always think about people, like, I am grouchy if I don't have breakfast, right? Imagine what it's like to be a kid who goes to school and is expected to learn and take tests when you are food insecure.
Yeah.
Really hard. I'm grouchy after an hour and a half. Right? And so think about the ways in which you opt out of doing well on that test that eventually means that you're not doing well in school, which makes it harder for you to graduate from high school, which makes it harder for you to get into the workforce. And not having access to these things that allow you to just show up as your best self really ultimately mean that you are limiting people's potential, but also you're just putting up roadblocks that mean that it's harder for them to get in the workforce. It's harder for them to make as much money as they'd like to make. It's frankly sometimes harder to even envision what's possible for yourself if you're struggling with these things. It's really deeply important to make sure people have access to the basic resources so that they can really envision the future that they want for themselves and their families.
Workforce participation rates are at an all-time low in the U.S. This is a tragic waste of our nation's most valuable resource, its people. On top of this, we are seeing high school seniors across numerous high schools collect their diplomas and essentially walk off the graduation stage into unemployment. This divide is growing. To bridge this gap, Onan is working with high schools, business alliances, and employer champions to scale Ready to Work. Ready to Work, powered by Onan, builds career pathways for high school seniors looking to enter the workforce after graduation. So, if you're an employer or community partner looking to shape the future labor pool, this is your opportunity. Learn how you can join this effort by visiting readytowork.org.
If those basic needs are unmet, it's really hard to move up the pyramid from there. And I think on the left, they want to just throw money at it. On the right, it's the attitudes like, oh, you just need to work. You just need to, you can't impose a middle-class paradigm on that lower strata. You just can't.
So, I wasn't raised with a lot of money. I'm pretty clear about that. There were moments where we struggled, and the stressors I felt day in, day out are different than the stressors I have now. And those stressors drove how my day went. The fact that could we pay the utility bill was a real concern for everybody, right? Are we going to still live here was a real concern, and it showed up in how I lived my day and went to school, and the urgency I felt and the stressors I felt, right? And so we have to acknowledge that if you are low income or part of a disadvantaged group, you are operating with additional stressors that are limiting what is possible for you, and frankly taking up headspace that you could be using to focus on achieving your potential, like you were talking about, right? So we got to get at these things like food and mental health. We got to get at people feeling connected and surrounded by others and being mentored. We got to get at you having access to healthy food so you're not struggling with obesity or struggling with diabetes. We have to get at these things because they are things that absorb space in people's heads and their days and create stress and then just force them to opt out of the workforce, but frankly, force them to opt out of what they can do for themselves, right? I think the argument that everybody deserves a shot at not sitting in trauma is a pretty good one.
Yeah.
I think most people would agree that like wherever you were born or whoever your parents are should not dictate like what your potential is.
So it doesn't take a lot to connect those challenges with economic or business challenges, right? So what role, in your view, should private industry employers play in addressing kind of these root cause issues? What's the role of companies?
One of the things I don't think people talk enough about is the ways in which companies can give their employees the opportunity to get out in community. So for us, we offer a lot of volunteerism initiatives. We do this massive volunteerism day. It's coming up August 26th. It's called Community Day, where we get out in community, primarily focused on food service. We give our employees volunteer time off. We actually help people get placed on local community boards. And the reason is because we believe that it's good for our employees and good for us to be connected to community, but it also drives a sense of belonging, right? There's data that shows that volunteerism feels good for the person you helped, but it feels even better for you as a volunteer.
Yeah.
We know that makes people more connected to the purpose of the work they're doing. We know it makes them more connected to the communities we serve. And it helps us come up with solutions for challenges that are really impactful in that way. And then I'd say on the other side, an example I have is that like we do this veteran suicide prevention work, and we have veterans who work here. And every company, for the most part, larger ones, has veterans who work there. And you don't know what a veteran is struggling with when they show up at your door, right? Like by the time they've gotten to your workplace, they've had a totally different work identity. And if we want to make sure we have workplaces that get the best out of our people, it's important to train people on what veterans might be experiencing so that when they enter the workforce, they can be successful and they can help us. Because frankly, like military service makes you a great employee. You are a great team player. You're great at innovating on the fly. We want those folks in the workforce, but we also have to understand they have lived experience that can create unique challenges for them. And so one of the things we do with our Face the Fight initiative is that we've worked with our employee resource groups to sort of train folks to understand what veterans might be going through, how they can support veterans, because that's part of our employee base, but it's also, people who are close to them as well. And so I think employers can do a lot to get their employees really engaged in this work, but then also to identify that there are people in their workforce who might be struggling with certain things, and they can provide resources to help with things like suicide prevention, veteran mental health, a lot of other topics too.
They can do stuff. We can do stuff that doesn't cost any money too. Like just we need to lighten up on our like rigid attendance policy. There are little things like that where you can make these little tweaks just in mindset and how we approach it. Obviously, it can be all that can be exploited, that grace or whatever. But I think that goes really a long way too, and it doesn't cost anything to do that.
Yeah, and it's good for the company. I mean, like the data shows that people like to connect their work to purpose, and so making a space for purpose-driven activities for your employees actually is good for you as the employer, right? Like people are proud to work for places that invest in other people. People will be more committed to the mission, and they'll be able to be more connected to what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, Tiffany, thank you so much. I'm glad we had you on. This is an interesting conversation. You're doing great work over there. And I love I'm big on measuring outcomes, and I think your approach to tackling really challenging issues, taking risk, measuring outcomes, owning what didn't work, learning from what didn't work, iterating and doing it again. I think that's I think you're onto something there. So excited for you. And how can folks connect with the foundation, with you, via the inner Googles?
Yes, enter the Googles. You can always go to humanafoundation.org. That is our website. And we provide details on the work we do when we have our open applications process. That's the place where we put the application up. We also answer questions there too. So don't be afraid to reach out. If you want to track me down, I'm very active on the LinkedIn, since we're saying the Googles these days.
Yes, yes.
And you can find me there, and you can find the Humana Foundation there, talking about our work, sharing learnings about what we're doing, and honestly, just trying to keep it honest and accountable for ourselves.
Well, there you have it. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep it real. Thank you for listening. This podcast is powered by Onin, the staffing partner delivering real results for manufacturing, logistics, and food processing companies nationwide. To learn more, visit www.oningroup.com. Until next time, keep it real.